and Dawn are still alive and are now on new adventures. So that's what I'll be talking about today, their new adventures. Who am I? Who am I? But I think just in the way of continuity with what Tony was talking about and where some of you have been this afternoon about anti-Semitism. Because in every generation, anti-Semitism needs a vehicle in which to express itself. And in this generation, it does so in something that we call victim politics. It's what we see in the world, we see it everywhere. It's infiltrated so much of our culture. We call our culture now post-Christian, we call it postmodern, relativistic, all these sort of words. Well, they all come from the same source, interestingly, and it's a source that is not apparent to most people. What is going on in the world now has not just come out of nowhere. It is actually purposeful. It's been building up for 100 years, and there are forces behind it. And this is something I was writing about 8 years ago, and no one would listen to me. Only starting to write the books. It was even before the word woke had appeared. But God had given me this message, and it was a book called, I've forgotten the name of it myself now. into the lion's den. And since then I've been very much engaged on the subject and frightened to see that all the things that I was talking about then are now with us. And so much so that they are the vocabulary of our culture. So that, when I say we're post-Christian, that our vocabulary is not a Judeo-Christian vocabulary anymore. The Ten Commandments are not, are just sort of laughed at now, and certainly not a part of how the world works. You only got to look at headlines and see, despite all the wars that are going on, you've got this one story about this bloke from MasterChef that seems to dominate, just about every headline, whether it's the Times front page or 2 days ago. I mean, this comes out of this culture, and it's just so ridiculous, the whole thing. So where does it come from? Well, it comes from a place where Tony once resided back in the 60s. So we won't give you, I'm sure Tony's given you his story. This goes way back. Even Tony doesn't go back as far as Karl Marx. So we're talking about going back to the 19th century. So Karl Marx, nice Jewish boy. It's very interesting that the three main architects of the 20th century were all Jewish, and none of them did anything that was, let's say, lastingly good. So you had Karl Marx with communism, you had Albert Einstein with ultimately the atomic bomb, and then Sigmund Freud with psychiatrists. Michigan, yeah. There we go. So we've given a lot of blessings to the world, but unfortunately there are other things as well. And the story I'm about to tell you, unfortunately, is a very Jewish story. And this is why a lot of people on the far right get some of their anti-Semitism from, because they blame us. I mean, the Jews get blamed for everything. The Jews got blamed for, communism, obviously, also capitalism, also Christianity. We just get blamed. I mean, you name it, we get blamed. The only thing we're not blamed for is Islam, I think. But maybe give them a few more years, they'll find an angle. But so you go back to Karl Marx. So he produces the Communist Manifesto, and the idea is it's very much an economic theory. It's all about the workers and those who control them, and the workers have to sort of break out of their situation and revolt. It's all about revolution. It's all about turning the tables, and it's never really worked. The only place that it sort of worked was Russia, and look what happened to Russia. Every country that's adopted Marxism or communism has become a failed country. Venezuela, Albania, China, or maybe not China. Well, China, I think, has improved since it's taken on capitalism, I think. So, but in terms of communism, it hasn't done any good. And these Marxists, when we got to the First World War, they thought, great, this war, the workers of each country will refuse to fight each other. And it didn't happen that way because everyone was caught up with their patriotism. And, we know what happened to the working class in our country in the First World War. Not a good thing, the trenches and everything. After the war, they went back to their thinking rooms, these Marxists. Unfortunately, they were all Jewish. And in Germany, in Frankfurt, and they got together and they formulated a new way of expressing Marxism through our culture. And it was something that was going to take a long time, but they got going very quickly. And interestingly, and this, I think it's connected, because you think something that is actually going to change the whole world needs to have some sort of spiritual underpinning, and in that case, not good spiritual underpinning. So the spiritual underpinning it had came from a lady called Alice Bailey. Yeah, a lot of you heard of Alice Bailey. Alice Bailey, about that time, 1920s, 1930s, she came up with a list of 10 points that society had to take on in order to rid the world of Christianity. And these were her 10 points. Remember, this is about 100 years ago. Take God and prayer out of the education system. Tick. Point 2, reduce parental authority over children. Tick. Point 3, tick. Destroy the traditional Judeo-Christian family structure. Tick. Point 4, make abortion legal and make it easy. Tick. Point 5, make divorce easy and legal. Yep. Free people from the concept of marriage for life, that is marriage for life. Point 6, make homosexuality an alternative lifestyle. Tick. Point 7, debase art and make it run mad. Well, we can see that. Point 8, use the media to promote and change the mindset. Point 9, create an interfaith movement. And point 10, get governments to make all these points law and get the church to endorse these changes. I mean, this is exactly what's happened 100 years ago. And this is through, spiritual, she was a theosophist, basically the occult. So we can assume there are dark forces that were underpinning the work of these Marxists, who were all atheists. They had no idea about God. They didn't care, but they were the hands that did it. So this is how they did it. I won't go into too much detail because it'll bog you down. But they're not going to mention your name. So what actually happened was they created this thing called critical theory. Now, it's interesting now because when I wrote about this, no one had heard of it, but now it's everywhere. How many courses there are in critical theory in university. And at its very basic, you can look at definitions of it, and it doesn't actually, the definition in Wikipedia just drives you mad. You can't figure out what it's about. And that's the point. It's all about taking things to pieces, deconstructing, but not building anything in its stead. And that's basically, it was everything is there to be criticised and deconstructed. Reject the knowledge, reject the notion of objectivity in knowledge. In other words, there is no such thing as absolute truth. That's where it comes from. This is where we get our culture now, where everything goes. Truth can be at whatever you want it to be. And the one thing that for them is a no-no is any idea of the Judeo-Christian background and the Christian family in particular. So the Christian family was targeted from that point onwards. And the idea was that they were going to infiltrate our culture very subtly. They were Jewish people in the 30s in Germany, not a good place to be, in the 30s being Jewish and communist. so they relocated to America, to Columbia University, which interestingly is still one of the center places of the woke madness. So they go there, and from there they sort of go into 3 different fields. As I say, not right away, but as a sort of a step through history. One of them was through academia, through the universities, one's through the media, and the other one was through Hollywood. The 3 ways of influencing culture. And you can trace all 3 and see how, basically you look at all 3 of them, that's how we basically get our information from the media, which at that time would have been, just newspapers and maybe radio, but now it includes obviously the internet and social media, etc. Academia, how much of the problems that we see in the world in terms of our, the wokeness and the rejection of truth, ironically comes from the universities, and from the students. Really sad. And Hollywood just pushing the boundaries, all the time, gradually, and all thoughts of censorship were sort of crumbling away as we saw, films getting more and more debased, basically, and, we can't even talk about what you see these days. So that's how they did it. And so it produces the culture where we are now. So here we are with Derek and Dawn, to bring it back to the mundane. Okay, so Derek and Dawn, the heroes of my first book, they were empowered to look at anti-Semitism. So in the book, the first book that I wrote, his name I've totally forgotten at the moment, but now everything changes. That's it. Now everything changes. They go on adventures into understanding what is at the centre of anti-Semitism. And they are just two ordinary people, that middle-aged, middle-class, white, non-Christian. They're just ordinary, every man, every woman. And by the end of the book, they get an understanding that there is this thing called anti-Semitism. They can't understand it, the world doesn't understand it, but it seems to point to something other. There's something going on in the cosmic realm. And they get some good advice on the way, and the main advice they get is follow the truth and then act on it. And after they've had their little adventure, suddenly they embark on a new one. But it's still the same motto, follow the truth. And this new adventure takes them into identity politics. So that it starts off where Dawn goes to a market, and there she finds a stall that has all these badges and flags, all with different colours and emblems, and you can imagine it's all the different ways that we can identify ourselves, sexually and through gender. And there was about 100 of them there, and she'd never seen this before. And some of them were pretty diabolical. The fact that this has been filmed means I can't mention what a lot of them refer to, but it was pretty terrible stuff, and it's been sold openly and acceptably. The person selling these badges was just a middle-aged person and very full of zeal. And she was so shocked to her core because she was, I'm an ordinary person. I'm a happily married woman. And what is my flag? Yeah, there is a flag, apparently. It's called the straight flag. And the straight flag is this black and white. So as boring as you can get. And she says, well, I don't mind being boring. I don't need the rainbow. I don't need all these different flags that that form part of the pride spectrum. So that gets to thinking, who am I? It gets to thinking on many levels, because society now seems to make that to be very important. Identity, this word, I think it really controls our society. And where did it come from? Well, this is where the two stories collide, because the idea of identity and how it has become more important than anything else, it seems, has come from this cultural Marxism that I was talking about, this critical theory that were being infiltrating into society. So we hit the 60s, 1960s, when Tony was out there with his red flag. I don't know too much about his story, but it became very trendy for students, for young people, to react against their parents. And of course, their parents would have come from traditional Christian or Jewish, families, and the structures, just ordinary people. So 60s, it was called the alternative lifestyle. Well, there was one slogan called "Make love, not war." You might remember that. Well, it was actually coined by one of these ancient German Marxist philosophers. He actually coined the phrase. He was in his 60s then, and his name was Marcuse. You might have heard of him. You might have heard of Marcuse. He was one of the Jewish German architects of all the Marxism that started to come into our society in the 60s. So in the 60s, suddenly we get the Labour Party changing. So the Labour Party that has held on to, well, it's now crumbled, mate, probably held on to up until the point of, I don't know much about politics, but I'd say Harold Wilson, Jim Callaghan, maybe a couple of generations after that. But once you start hitting Tony Blair onwards, and particularly Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer, we get to people who were brought up with a different form of Labour, and they call it the New Left. They call themselves the New Left. And they knew that the very core of their philosophy was nothing about helping the working people. It was all about changing the culture. They were so much, sort of part of this whole system that's all that was important to them. So what happened then, we can think of all the names that a lot of us are of a certain age here. We can, obviously, PLO, okay, the Palestine Liberation Organisation back in 1964, whatever, but at the same time we had Animal Lib, Women's Lib. You can just think, and you look at them all, not Black Power, well, yeah, it was Black Power, wasn't it? Because now it's Black Lives Matter, which is all part of the same thing. But when you look at their emblems and their flags, you can see communist motifs there. You can see where it's all come from, Obviously, people didn't see it at the time, but this is all part of the infiltration, how the world was changing. Out of that comes this very quaint thing that we all joked about when it first came in, political correctness. It was all joked about, back in the 70s and the 80s, but now it has taken over to such an extent that, Greg Wallace from MasterChef can be basically lose just about everything because of things he did when the culture was very different. And we can't excuse them all. A lot of people who are now being sort of fallen under, let's say, the cosh of this new thinking, a lot of them were simply doing what everyone was doing at the time in the 60s, 70s. And when you think of rock stars and the groupies and all that, it was all seemed to be acceptable at the time. Now we'd look at them and think, they were basically child molesters, But there are some like Jimmy Savile that, you can't be excused under it, or Rolf Harris. But you can see the culture changing, and now everyone who's maybe a man of a certain age in the media or whatever has got to start deleting all the tweets he's ever made and trying to erase his history, because someone will be out to get him, because this new culture has replaced our Christian society, which relies on love and forgiveness. Well, in this new Marxist paradise we have, forgiveness does not exist. No one is ever forgiven. If someone has fallen down as a result of it, that's their end, really. And the two groups of people that are not protected by this whole system are, you can guess, are the Jews and the Christians. Because there is a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy of victim groups that have been created, these artificial victim groups that have come out of this whole Marxist system. That's how they did it. When you think about who the grand architect of it all is and what he wants to do with society, all Satan wants to do is to divide, confuse, divide and conquer. And this is exactly how it's happening in our society, in our generation. It's through victim groups. A victim group is a group that is an artificially created group. We don't know who by it. It's like, who's actually doing all this? And right at the top you'll get certainly anything LGBT, or let's say Muslim and religion, but I say not Christian and not Jewish. You'll get things like like Just Stop Oil would fit into that as well, and Animal Lib, and all sorts of things. Even certain events, like the Grenfell Tower thing, that became a protected group as well that you can't speak against. And this is how we live. So if you're an ordinary person living in our society now, you're basically living in fear, because you're just scared that you might say something, and that just by saying something or praying in silence. This chap, and he got arrested for praying or for thinking. we laugh about it, but this is what's coming to, and it is 1984. Okay, it's 40 years late, but it's there. It's people being too scared to stand out, and you get sucked into things. And then we have to look at what is happening in our society with something that's close to our hearts, which is the Palestinian thing, because that's all very much part of the same thing. It is nothing to do with Palestine. We know it's all to do with hate of the Jews. And what it is, it's a cause. Okay, so the people that, let's say, not everyone, because a lot of people are sucked in and they don't know why they're sucked in, but those who are, say, core people, like Greta Thunberg, whatever her name is, she's come from, environmentalist stuff, and now suddenly she's the main spokesperson for the Palestinians. It's all the same, and I've seen with marches, and she doesn't know what she's saying. She's always reading from a mobile phone. In other words, she doesn't know what to say. It's all there, and that's the thing. It's all about slogans. When you go to a march, because I've been on a few now. I've been on at least 2 or 3 of the pro-Israel ones, and at least 2 of the other lot. Major difference. Because the other lot, it's all about chanting mindlessly. It's about hate, And I remember writing in the last book, those of you who read it might have remember page 117, where it basically says that when I see a Palestinian banner out there, I see a Nazi. I see a Nazi swastika. I see a Crusader flag. I see all the emblems that were to do with Jew hatred. And that's what we see now. I see it, and I'm sure more people are seeing it. And it's absolutely nothing to do with any sort of care for the Palestinians. I mean, the figures are now coming out about the death toll in Syria over the last few years. Well over 500,000 Muslims killed by other Muslims. It's even come out in this very secular, very popular podcast by Alistair Campbell and the other chap, the politician. Was it all about politics or something like that? I've seen an advert for it, and even they are saying, 500,000 people have been killed in Syria, and yet we concentrate on Gaza with, at the most, 40,000 or whatever. Yet Syria never got people out in the streets, and Sudan, and there's Nigeria. So all it is, it's a cause, and you think Palestine is a cause that's come out of this thinking, because there's no logic to it. It's all driven by emotions, and that's the other part of it, is that we bypassed our brain. And this is sad. Our generations that are coming up, Generation Z in particular, who rely on TikTok for everything that they get, it's all about emotions. You speak to any of them, and I have done, or I've seen people who have tried to interview them at these rallies, and all you get from them is swearing, or they walk away. They cannot answer. They don't know why they're there. They're there because it's a cause that they've been told to turn up to. What does that say about people's free will? Where is their free will? It's been taken away, and that is what's happening in our culture. And all I'm saying is, it's come from somewhere, and I have no idea where it's going, but it's not going to a good place. And we have to be educated. Now we're here because we're very concerned about Israel-Palestine. It's really important to educate yourself on that. Just like going back to Derek and Dawn. So in their new adventures here, so they meet people. She goes to a book club where one of them comes out as lesbian, and which is quite an interesting one. Another one is a Christian, another one is a Hindu. And they have all these interactions where they try to understand each other and realise that identity gets in the way of everything. And we look at that as Christians, and we think, what is our identity? What should be our identity? And it is really straightforward, isn't it? Our identity is in Jesus. We've sung about him enough times, and he's so much a part of what we're all about. We mustn't waver from that central fact that all he wants is for us to conform as much as we can to him, and for him to be the centre of our lives. And But if you're getting sucked into other expressions of identity, then it becomes harder. You know, now there are Christians who have gay inclinations, and I know a few, but they're solid Christians and they know about their inclinations, and in a sense, you know, it's the way, it's what they allow to control their lives is, you know, is how to please God, and they always know that even though they've got inclinations, Jesus is still the centre of their lives, and they would, you know, if they were asked what their identity was, it would always be in Jesus. And the problem is now, because of those 100 or so different ways of expressing yourself sexually and gender-wise, these people would actually call themselves primarily through their gender identity. And even a lot of Christians, and I know Christians that would stress their gender before they'd stress the fact that they're Christian, you know, and that is not what we're meant to be doing. And all that's going to do, it's going to distract them from having Jesus at the centre of their lives. And you can see what society is trying to do. It's trying to make us not just accept that there are, say, different genders, but we have to embrace them as well. The very name of it, the global name of it is pride, isn't it? That they're proud to be that, and we should be proud. And if we're not proud, and if we're not rejoicing at their status, then we are enemies of society. Well, I see a Bible quote coming. I see James 10:10. If you embrace the world, you become an enemy of God. So we have to choose God or this world. Two kingdoms. You know, the kingdom of the world is out there and it's doing its stuff. And at the moment, it's encroaching into the church. Look what happened to the Archbishop. You know, the Archbishop got done in because of his wokeness, basically. But in reality, he got done in because he spoke against Israel. And he didn't, you know, I remember when I was here last time, he had only just made this proclamation, or maybe it was just after that, about, you know, he was condemning Netanyahu and Israel, but he wasn't being very biblical at all. And some of us put our names to a letter that went to him to say, that condemned him by saying that you get back to your Bible and then have a look at Israel. But he didn't. He didn't respond to this letter. And he's now the first archbishop, in 1,000 years or more, that's had to resign. You know, so that's a pretty big thing, and that's what happens when you mix up the kingdoms. And so, you know, we have to, you know, everyone here, we have to think whatever, you know, you might like. Yeah, I keep thinking about Tony. Tony was, you know, into the more lefty type of thing, but I'm sure if you ask Tony what he is now, he's Christian first and foremost. I mean, even me, people, because I'm from a Jewish background, people try to get me to define myself. And this is a bit controversial. I don't call myself a Messianic Jew. I would say I'm a Bible-believing Christian, because for me, it's Jesus at the centre. My Jewish background is important, but if I start calling myself something that, you know, a completed Jew or Jewish Christian or Hebrew Christian, all that, somehow it mixes up my identities. It suddenly brings my Jewishness into equal sort of place as my belief in Jesus. And I don't think that's right. But I do, not that I'm turning my back on my background, but it is important that our identity is totally in Jesus, and that people know that when we're out there in the world, that they can see Jesus in us, because that's what it's all about. There's nothing else more important than being Jesus to other people. You can say what you like to people, you know, it's what you do that they look at. You know, someone said it's the only Bible they'll see is you. You know, forget about, it's not your words necessarily, it's how you conduct yourself. And all of you that went on that march, you know, have in the rain and the wind, and you could have been watching football on TV, you could have been in the warm, but you decided to stand alongside Jewish people this afternoon and other times. That's what the Jews there will see. They will see the Christians that have gone the extra mile, and they will see there must be something about Jesus for those Christians to be doing that. You know, on October the 6th, we had someone that we know who works for CFI did an event in Brentwood on the day before the commemoration of October the 7th. And it was an event for Jews and Christians together, where we all got together and we read out the names of the hostages, and we were just there to support Israel and to support the local Jewish population. And they were absolutely amazed. You know, and there was a rabbi going from table to table, thanking all the Christians for being there, for standing alongside them. So they've seen Jesus in those people, and that would be a witness. The other interesting thing is that a lot of them took my book, and my book makes it very clear where I come from, but they're very open. And I think there's a synagogue in Plymouth, apparently I only found out a few weeks ago, that have got at least like a dozen of my books, and it's having an effect on them. It's showing them about the reality of, you know, the spiritual background to all this anti-Semitism, but it also mentions that, you know, Jesus is in there somewhere, and these are Jews that are not. So, you know, good can come out of all this badness that's happening, but it's up to Christians and Gentile Christians to be a witness to the Jews around them, and for people to see that there is a kingdom, because we are not called to fix the kingdom of the world. We're called to rescue people from the kingdom of the world. You know, we need to bring people from the world into the kingdom of heaven. That is our role. So you can see this confusion that comes out through cultural Marxism, through critical theory. It's been put into place to stop that from happening. And it's getting more difficult. It's more difficult already. If I imagine, not that I am one, but I know one or two of you here are, well, you two there, street evangelists. I don't know whether it's going to get to a time when it's going to be difficult for you to say certain things. I do know people that have been arrested. There was something up in Manchester just last week where street evangelist was confronted by a policeman saying, you have to move. I mean, this is a bloke that's been doing it virtually every day or every week for ages, and he was doing it the right way. He wasn't like a loud halo he wasn't a nuisance. He was telling the gospel, you know, in a very gentle way. But there were Muslims there, and they wanted to pray in the same place. So the policeman moved him along so that they could pray. And as he was pushed away, the Muslims were actually swearing at him. You see it on the video. There's a video on YouTube. And that's just sort of where we're at. It's the kingdom. We have to make sure where our kingdoms are. Well, I can probably say a lot more, but I don't know how much time I've got. Probably. I don't want to go on forever. But it's just that we have to be very aware of the fact that we are in a very, very different society than maybe we even were 5 years ago. And the world is getting more complicated. I'm definitely going to listen to Tony's talk from this morning. I imagine, did you change the talk at the last minute because of what happened?
Well, the book that we have at 5 o'clock was probably...
Oh, there you go. See, that's how it should work. You know, we all get our set sermons in our head, but when the Lord tells us something else, but because Tony, being an expert, as I've known him for 30 years plus, on this subject, and then suddenly something so remarkable happens, we don't know what's going on, and we only hope that Tony does. But I suppose time will... Yeah, so we have to wait. But the fact is that we're on a very, very confusing times at the moment, and we need our foundations. And the world is teetering because what this new Marxism and the way of thinking, it doesn't supply any foundations at all, because critical theory is all about deconstructing. There's nothing about it that's about giving you anything positive to hold on to. The fact that its core understanding is your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. They don't even agree where truth is, you know. And we see that with the narratives of the Palestinian narrative, how different it is from the Israeli narrative. Well, the truth has to be somewhere. You know, who do we believe? And we know who we believe. But even some aspects of our narrative can be propaganda as well, because that's the world that we live in. We have to be honest about this. We always have to look for where the truth is. We have to be counter-cultural. Our culture tells us that it doesn't matter, but we know as Christians that the truth, you know, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and it's the truth that has to be at the centre. 2 Corinthians 5:17, anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life has gone and a new life has begun. We have to hold on to that. That, you know, the new life in Jesus is not an easy one. It's probably getting harder every day, but it's our anchor. It's what we hold on to, and that's what we need to do. So, shall I finish then? Any questions? Any questions? Because, you know, we could go in all sorts of directions here. But,
did you specifically look into the Jewish history there, like with the Frankfurt School?
yeah. No, I didn't realise at the time how many Jewish people were involved in it. Even